Hey everyone, I already talked about some of the worst / bad RPGs in a previous video, so consider this a continuation. Here I want to begin with the absolute worst ones, and finish with the, let's say, controversial entries. In other words, games that I consider bad or in the best case scenario decent, but they are liked by perhaps many. One of the absolute worst games I have played is Zoid's Mokushiroku. I know this is not an RPG but a tactical game, however it is worth throwing it here, and this is perhaps a good example of what nostalgia can do, because while talking about tactical or strategic games, this entry came to my mind, and I remember I had a lot of fun with it, but there is a catch. The only way I recommend to play this game is with a friend, otherwise be prepared to choose a character that doesn't matter and jump into something like real-time strategy, so to speak. I mean, you have to move your unit in these maps where, after a certain number of turns, the terrain will change, and once you touch an enemy unit, the game throws you into these action fights. The core ideas are good, I am not gonna lie, but playing against the computer is just nerve-wracking. Because let's say that you need to land around 50 hits to destroy the target, well they just need to land like 10. Unfortunately that is not everything, because the game is buggy and broken in some moments if you go after a peculiar skill to attack in long range, as the enemy will pretty much kill itself, which is something dumb, and there aren't many stages, turning the experience stagnant quite fast. Then again, the only way I recommend to play this game is with another friend, otherwise just stay away from it. The next entry is a game that I was told to play many years ago. At least I didn't buy it, but I was told it was extraordinary, revolutionary, that it begins slow but it becomes into a masterpiece. Two Worlds. I am someone really patient. I can throw like 30 hours for a good plot, and while at first I didn't really catch its intro, it was underwhelming to say the least. Then I had no idea what to do, so I ran in circles, checked some areas, got kinda lost, returned to the beginning, talked to some characters, and I wasn't feeling well. I was forcing myself. It had interesting ideas to stack armors of the same type, and the menus were like some old CRPGs where you can throw a lot of things. I mean, the game had some interesting core elements, but its level of exploration wasn't the best. However, it was funny that you were able to beat pretty much anyone, and the fights sometimes reached areas with some cinematics, and it was hilarious for the wrong reasons. Unfortunately, I consider it bad in a low rank, because these kind of fantasy settings were better executed in previous consoles. So what I saw here is a game that tried to chew more than it was able to, and this is just scratching the surface because somewhere around 10 hours I simply abandoned the game. Let's follow with the Spectral Tower. Previously I had talked about Idea Factory and Compile Heart, how they got the kind of reputation they have and some details like that, but I tried to explain things in a neutral way. The thing here is that if you think Neptunia games are bad, at least the first games, you haven't seen anything. Spectral Tower was released in 1996, and the idea of this game is that you need to reach the top of some towers, with roguelike elements, even for character creation. So you enter a number, get your randomized character and be ready to conquer each tower, where you go from 10 floors, then 20, 100, 1000 and you get the idea. In any case, once you get into these places, you need to find the key and the exit, where each floor has some enemies, tiles with some effects and some random items here and there. The battles are pure RNG, where you throw a dice and you have 50% of chances to land a hit, unless you have the fortune to get a unit which uses life points to attack, then the clock is ticking against you. Unfortunately, one hit is all you need to beat the enemies, unless you are reaching high floors. And that's it. Literally, there's nothing else. While I will give them the benefit of the doubt, as it was their first game Idea Factory created, unfortunately this is not the only one that has a poor execution as this one. And while I have enjoyed many of the recent releases, Spectral Tower is just a really long game that doesn't offer anything. In the next entry, I want to talk about Eye of the Beholder 3. Now this is a rare case because the first two entries were quite good. I am not gonna place them on any pedestal, but playing the first entry was a nice experience. It took a decent amount of time and puzzles were rather easy but interesting in their own way. Eye of the Beholder 2 was also quite good, following the same group of adventurers from the first game, but improving on different ideas that the first entry needed. But the third entry was an oddball, because the dungeons were in a sense increased in size, so it felt like it was going to be massive. Ironically, puzzles became a bit annoying, where sometimes you had to search big areas for a down bottom. The only combat element that was improved was the all attack bottom, but aside from that, it was pretty much the same as the previous entries. And the story ended as it began. There was no real challenge, there were no real improvements. On the contrary, I could say that it looked a bit worse, and the sound was on the bad side. In the next spot, Lunar Dragon Song. This game was released in 2005, and the main issue with this entry is the kind of mechanics that it has. Its story is decent, as we get to see the beginning of this world, by Althea, who also sent 4 dragons to protect it. After this little introduction, we get to see the main character Gian, who works delivering parcels along her bossy friend Lucia, where along the journey they will get to know other likable characters from different areas, like Gabi, a beast woman, and the marksman Flora, and so on, where the main plot revolves around the Vile tribe, where the leader of this faction wants to use the power of the goddess. I will say that up to that point, there is no major issue. The problems begin once we try to play, because a mechanic that was used since the primitive times of gaming hurts your character. Yeah, running damages your character. Okay, perhaps that is the reason why Lucia is a healer and Flora another healer, and there are multiple places to heal your character. Let's just slowly walk around the world. Oh, but guess what? You cannot outrun the enemies by walking, and your weapons break. And after a fight, you have 2 options, which are take experience or get your loot. This unfortunately leads to picking specific fights and try to preserve your stuff as much as possible, while running constantly out of health or running out of money because you have to replace your stuff. So you cannot run, and the game forces you to choose between experience and loot. Okay. Breakable stuff. Fire Emblem have those. We can work around that. Then I almost sure someone in the development team was like, hey, why don't we take this mechanic from Wizardry, where you cannot choose who you attack? Yeah, sounds like a good idea. Sure, I have beat other several games where you cannot choose who you attack, or at least play them, but by that point I wasn't really having fun. It is far from a hard game, but it is more like an annoying entry, with these core mechanics. Perhaps it is not a mediocre game, but bad? Yeah. Let's continue with Telephone. This is another Japan exclusive. However, there is a funny story behind why I got to play this game. Back in early 2000, this entry received a localization, Buccaneer, but it received one. And someone had the amazing idea to stick a Pokemon label, and poof, miracle! So Pokemon Diamond effectively was hated since the early 2000s, which is ironic considering that the real one didn't impress that much, as far as I know. In any case, in Telefang you use your phone to call monsters and throw them into the fray. Simple as that. There were some interesting ideas to evolve your monsters, but I never really dived that much. It will make sense in a moment. So, when this friend came to check this title, he was super hyped. Like, dude, you have to look at this. It's way better than Pokemon, etc, etc. And we start playing. So I remember we saved the file, turned the game off, and moved to another place. Like 1 hour later, I turned the Game Boy on, and there was no save data. We looked at each other, and he told me, don't sweat it, we didn't get that far. So he lent me the game, and I kept playing. Well, I don't know the real game, I placed this Pokemon Diamond / Jade here, because this thing had an abysmal number of issues. Being able to go through walls, erasing your progress, randomly changing stuff, and so on. And yeah, while Pokemon wasn't the first one to use the idea to have monsters on the battlefield as your companions, the fact is that Telefang died as many others. Maybe it was a decent game, but for the peculiar way I got to play it, it was just a bad experience. So after losing my progress 4 times, I returned the cartridge to my friend and never asked for it ever again. From here, let's jump into the controversial entries, games that may be liked by many, but I place quite low for XYZ reasons. Let's follow with Septerra Core. We could say that RPGs have followed many different approaches depending from where they are developed. While in my book, I don't really care about that. Septerra Core was a weird experiment from the western side. trying to reproduce ideas from Japan. The main concept was interesting, and characters likable on many fronts. Now, whenever I hear the term tropes, clichés and stuff like that, the fact is that they happen in any market. It doesn't matter where they are created. So from my side, no real issue there. And its plot was rather intriguing, where the world was fragmented, and let's say that the upper class start to invade the junkyards, where a main character Maya lives. From a narrative point of view, this game was quite good, and it was almost fully voice acted, which was something rare around those years. However, its gameplay is the one that pushes the player back really hard, as they copied JRPGs in every step, good and bad things, where ironically the bad things shine a bit more. This is a turn-based RPG with mechanics similar to Final Fantasy VII, where we need to dive into different dungeons, and as we progress we can explore more and more. And that is where the issues start to rise, because while its combat mechanics were decent, the main issue was the amount of time combats needed. They were not particularly challenging. Then add big dungeons, and tons of enemies here and there, with gimmicky elements, where sometimes you needed specific characters to progress. These details tested your patience, as you were able to lose up to 1-2 hours in this process. This game was a serious attempt, but unfortunately it didn't hit the right place. If I recommend to play it, it's just in case you can increase its speed quite substantially in combats and while traversing dungeons. Otherwise, be my guest if you wanna take a good chunk of time. Another entry that I left quite early was Paper Mario Sticker Star. This is another game where I was questioning myself, why? I mean, Paper Mario on the 64 was an extraordinary game. The Thousand Year Door was a beautiful experience. The thing is that Paper Mario was that other side of the story where things could turn slightly dark, or games where you could dive a bit more into other secondary characters, which usually never shined. Heck, having Peach and Bowser as party members. But here, since the get-go, it felt like this game was going to be bad. And yeah, we go from interesting stories to something trivial. RPG elements? Nah, we have those in other entries. An interesting story? Nah, this is Mario. We can go for something washed down. What about other characters to color things? Nah. If you know about the background from this entry, there is no need to say who was the one who told the team in charge of this game to abandon all of those ideas. Battles, while turn-based, were not the same, because the only real reason to jump into them was because of those crappy stickers, and while environmentally the stickers added a creative layer, they lost their shine really fast. It was depressing going from really vibrant places with many interesting NPCs to this repetitive thing. So yeah, I am not fond of this franchise since then. For me, Paper Mario ended in the Wii. The Sticker Star is just a waste of time, coming from the background I explained. I have heard that Origami was better, but I don't know, perhaps one day in the future. And in our last stop, we have the polar opposite from the 6th entry. Crappy story, but great gameplay, Eternal Sonata. This is definitely the most controversial game in this list, because I know that many place this entry quite high. Story-wise, we jump into a fictitious world dreamt by Frédéric Chopin before his inevitable end. Okay, nothing wrong. But their first cinematics left a weird impression on me, like, are they perhaps a bit too long in moments that shouldn't be? I mean, monologues while falling? Okay, maybe I am going harsh with this game, but throwing a whole allegory about music in this way wasn't that great, because once I start hearing the names of the characters, it is more than obvious that the creative team had an idea on mind. But once the main plot started to be shown, I felt completely out of place while playing this thing, and some narrative moments can be questionable in every single step of the way. Like perhaps gathering a bit too much floral dust was wild. Unfortunately, the story never really improved. It was predictable in every turn, and those cuts to show a random historic moment about Chopin didn't help at all. But the cherry on top is when one of these characters tried to imitate a really iconic scene from a Turkish movie. Yeah, this is where I threw this entry out of the window. Chopin's story was quite wild, even after death, so I don't really understand how things ended up like this. In all seriousness, if you like the story, read some of his last moments. They are a much better story than what was presented here. Gameplay-wise, I will say that it was entertaining. The whole idea of guarding attacks on different tempos was creative and dynamic, punishing if you messed up, but rewarding once you get the idea. And other ideas like light and shadows while in combat, where some enemies can change depending from the position, and these lights and shadows change, turning some fights quite tactical, and then we can add groups to chain attacks, counter enemies, and other elements. This is just scratching the surface, so if I recommend to play this game, it's just because of its gameplay. So here I have a really divided opinion. Its story, it's garbage, but the gameplay, it's a lot of fun. In any case, I hope you found this video informative. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.